Nobody called the manager. Not the young woman in the produce aisle who had been watching from behind a stack of bagged salad. Not the teenage boy stocking shelves at the end of the row who had turned away the moment it started. Not the older man in the red fleece who had been standing close enough to hear every word and had pushed his cart slowly in the other direction. Like the frozen foods section had suddenly become more interesting than anything happening 6 feet away. Not one of the 40-something people in that Sobeys on a Thursday evening in November did anything at all. Aisle 7. A grocery store in Sudbury, Ontario, and a woman's coat folded over the handle of a shopping cart, a coat she had just taken off and placed there without being asked, and that she was about to give to a stranger. Nobody in that store knew that the woman doing this, the one now standing in her cardigan in the November cold of a grocery store with inadequate heating, had once been the stranger, that she had been 11 years old when it happened, and that she had never forgotten the specific feeling of being seen by someone who had every reason to keep walking. Loretta Bergeron grew up in Sudbury's East End, in a house where the porch light stayed on not because someone was coming home, but because Loretta's mother, Donna, was afraid of the dark and had been since childhood, and had passed that fear, without meaning to, into every corner of the house. Her father's name was Paul. Paul left when Loretta was 6, not dramatically, the way some men leave with a door slam and a final word, but quietly, the way a season ends. One January he was there. By March he was an address in Sault Ste. Marie that occasionally sent birthday cards on the wrong date. Donna worked the front desk at a dental office on Elm Street for 22 years. The hours were 8 to 5, and the pay was what it was, and what it was not enough, not quite. Not in the way that meant they were desperate, but in the way that meant every month there was a calculation. A list of things that could wait and things that could not, and that list was the background noise of everything Loretta's childhood was built on. She was 11 years old the afternoon that changed what she understood about people. Donna had sent her to the corner store on Paris Street for milk and bread. It was November, the first real cold snap of the year, the kind where the wind off the Sudbury Basin cuts through a jacket like the jacket is not there. Loretta had $4.60 in her coat pocket, the exact amount for a 2-liter of milk and a loaf of great value bread. She counted it at the counter. The woman at the register, who was young and not unkind but was the kind of tired that comes from a double shift, rang it through. $4.89. Loretta looked at the screen. She looked at the coins in her hand. She was 29 cents short. She had counted wrong at home. Or she had miscounted the coins in her pocket on the way over. She stood at the counter with $4.60 and a total of $4.89, and the specific shame of being 11 years old and not having enough, and knowing it was her fault and not knowing what to do about it. She did not cry. She was too old to cry in a store. She started putting the milk back on the counter. A man behind her in line, she never learned his name. He was maybe 50, wearing a Carhartt jacket and work boots with dried mud on the toes. He reached past her and placed 2 quarters on the counter without a word. He did not make a production of it. He did not say "You're welcome" in advance. He did not look at her with the expression adults sometimes use when they are being generous and want you to understand that they are being generous. He just set the coins down and picked up his basket and waited. She looked at him. He looked at the screen. The cashier took the quarters. The transaction completed. Loretta picked up the milk and the bread and walked home in the cold, and did not think about it again for years, not consciously, not as a memory she visited. It simply went somewhere inside her and stayed there the way things stay, when you are too young to have the language for them, but old enough to know they matter. Donna raised her with a particular economy of words. She was not cold. She was efficient. The way people become efficient when they have been doing everything alone for long enough that efficiency stops being a choice and becomes a personality. She made dinner every night from scratch, not because she enjoyed cooking, because eating out was $12 they did not have. She fixed things herself: the leaky tap under the bathroom sink, the drawer that would not close, the section of fence in the backyard that came loose every spring. She did not complain about fixing them. She just fixed them. There was one thing she said regularly, not often enough to become a slogan, but often enough to land. She said it when Loretta came home from school upset about something that had happened to someone else. When she did not know if she should have stepped in and had not. Donna would say, plainly, without drama, "You already knew what the right thing was. You just had to decide if you were going to do it. That was the whole lesson. Not delivered as a speech, not framed on a wall. Just said in the kitchen over dishes, while Donna was doing 3 things at once, and Loretta was standing in the doorway, trying to figure out whether she should have said something and had not. Loretta became a pharmacist, not because someone had guided her toward it, because she had spent her childhood watching her mother carefully ration prescriptions at the end of the month, cutting pills when the refill was not covered, skipping days when the math didn't work, and Loretta had understood early that the people who most needed medication were often the people least able to afford the gap between what the system covered and what the prescription cost. She wanted to stand on the other side of that counter. She wanted to be the person who knew what the options were. She had worked at the same Rexall on Regent Street for 11 years. She knew her regulars the way bus drivers know their passengers, by pattern, by presence, by the particular cadence of what they needed and how often they needed it. She knew which ones were rationing. She knew which ones were embarrassed to ask about generics. She knew which ones came in near the end of the month and bought fewer things than they came in for, and left without the item they had come in for because somewhere between the door and the register, the math had not worked out. She did not have a dramatic origin story. She was not a famous pharmacist. She was a woman who showed up, filled prescriptions accurately, and remembered people's names, which is not a small thing in a place where people often feel like a chart number looking for a counter to stand at. Her daughter's name was Isabel. Isabel was 28 and lived 40 minutes away in North Bay with a partner named Devon and a toddler named Max, who had his grandmother's eyes and his father's laugh, and was at the age where he found everything either terrifying or hilarious, with very little in between. Isabel called every Sunday, not because she was an especially dutiful daughter, but because she and Loretta had the kind of relationship that had gotten easier as Isabel got older and understood more of what Donna's efficiency had been made of. The calls were not long. They did not need to be. What Loretta did not tell Isabel, not that November, was that the pharmacy had been bought out. A chain acquisition, the kind that gets announced in a memo and explained at a staff meeting where everyone nods and nobody says what they are actually thinking. The Rexall was becoming a different store. One of those combination pharmacy and everything else formats that the company was rolling out across mid-size Ontario cities, and the staffing model was changing, and Loretta's position, specifically her full-time senior pharmacist role with its accompanying benefits and salary, was one of the positions changing with it. She was 51 years old. She had worked in that building for 11 years. She had a mortgage with 4 years left on it, and a pension that was meaningful but not complete, and a daughter in North Bay who did not need to worry about this right now, because Devon had just started a new job, and baby Max had a specialist appointment coming up, and Loretta was the kind of mother who absorbed things quietly rather than distribute them. She did not panic. She was Donna's daughter. She made a list. She updated her resume. She sent applications to 3 other pharmacies in Sudbury. She set aside 3 months of savings as a buffer and calculated what 4 months of reduced income would look like and decided she was not going to think about 5 months until she had to. She continued working. She continued showing up at 8, knowing what she was walking into and not letting it change how she did her job, because the people who came in at 8:15 for their metformin or their blood pressure medication did not know what was happening behind the counter and did not need to. That November Thursday was a regular evening. She had stopped at the Sobeys on LaSalle Boulevard after her shift to pick up a few things, nothing specific. The kind of grocery run that is more about motion than necessity. The way you go to the store when the apartment feels too quiet and buying two things gives the evening a shape. She was in her work clothes still. The pharmacy polo under her coat, flat shoes, hair pulled back in the way it always was after a full day of being presentable. She was in aisle 7, looking at soup when she heard it. A woman, early 30s, in a winter coat that had seen too many winters, was at the end of the aisle with a grocery basket. She was not doing anything remarkable. She was standing still, in the way that people stand when they are calculating, not the grocery list kind of calculating, the other kind, the kind that happens when you are in a store and the total in your head has just gone somewhere you did not expect. Beside the woman was a girl, maybe 9 or 10. She had a backpack on, the kind kids wear home from school, and she was looking at her mother's face with the specific attention of a child who has learned to read weather in a parent's expression. The woman put 2 cans of soup back on the shelf, then a box of crackers. She kept looking at what was left in the basket. She was doing the math that Loretta knew by heart. The math that Donna had done at the kitchen table. The math that has no elegant solution because it is not a math problem. It is a resources problem dressed up like a math problem. And the answer is the same every time, which is that something does not come home tonight. Loretta stood at the other end of the aisle. She could have kept going. There were people closer to the woman who did not move. The teenager stocking shelves glanced over and looked back at the shelf labels. The young woman with the bagged salads had her phone out. The man in the red fleece had already turned his cart around by then, his back to all of it. Loretta thought about the list of things on her own plate. The buyout, the applications she had not yet heard back from. The 4 years left on the mortgage, the calculation she had been running since October. She had her own math problem. It was a perfectly reasonable reason to keep moving. She walked to the end of the aisle. She stood near the woman, not close enough to crowd her, close enough to be clearly there. She said quietly that she was going to get a few extra things and asked if she could add something to the woman's basket. The woman looked at her. She did not say thank you yet. She said she was fine. Loretta said she knew. She said she was getting soup anyway, and she always bought too much of it, and it would just sit in her cabinet. The woman was quiet. She looked at Loretta, then at her daughter, then back at the shelf. Something shifted in her face, not gratitude yet, just the specific drop of tension that happens when someone is allowed to stop pretending for a moment. She said her name was Vanessa. Loretta said hers. She picked up 4 cans of soup and put them in Vanessa's basket. She added a box of crackers. She did not make it into an event. She did not ask questions. She did not find out the backstory or the reason or the circumstances. She knew what she was looking at. She did not need the explanation. Sometimes you already know what the right thing is. You just have to decide if you are going to do it. Then Vanessa's daughter, the girl with the backpack, said that she was cold. She said it the way children say things, as plain fact, not as a complaint, just as information about what was true. Loretta looked at the girl. She looked at the woman's coat, which was thin enough that she would have known it in a pharmacy, the kind of coat you see on people who are choosing between this month's coat and this month's groceries, and have chosen this month's groceries for long enough that the coat has become a document of that choice. She took off her own coat, not the pharmacy polo under it. The coat itself, the good one, the navy wool blend she had bought 3 years ago at the Bay, the one she had thought about replacing last winter and then decided could last 1 more season. She took it off. She set it over Vanessa's shoulders without asking. She said it was too warm in the store anyway. Vanessa did not argue. She stood very still for a moment, the way people stand when something unexpected has happened and the body has not caught up to it yet. Then she pulled the coat around herself and looked at Loretta and said, simply, "Thank you." Loretta said of course. She said she hoped the rest of the evening was easier. She took her basket to the register and paid for her things, and drove home in the November air with the heat on full, and her pharmacy polo as the outermost layer, and the particular feeling of someone who has done the right thing and is now cold. She did not tell Isabel that Sunday. There was not much to tell, or so she thought then. A woman in a grocery store, a coat. November. It was not a story yet. It became one, though not in the way she expected. 3 weeks after that evening, Loretta received a call from a number she did not recognize. The woman on the line had a voice she did not place at first, and then she did. It was Vanessa. She had found Loretta through the pharmacy logo on the polo she had been wearing under the coat, which Vanessa's daughter had pointed out on the drive home. She had called the Rexall and asked for a pharmacist named Loretta and been told, yes, she works here. Would you like to leave a message? She had left a message. Loretta called back on her lunch break, sitting in her car in the parking lot behind the store. Vanessa said she had been wanting to call for 3 weeks, but had not known if it was appropriate. She said the coat was hanging on the hook by her front door, and that every morning when her daughter put on her own coat for school, she pointed at Loretta's and said, "That's the soup lady's coat," which was not an accurate description, but was the one that had stuck. Loretta laughed. A short one, the kind that comes when someone has said something that is both slightly wrong and exactly right. Vanessa said she wanted to return the coat. Loretta said she did not have to. There was a pause on the line. Vanessa said it was not about having to. She said she had been thinking about it, and she had something she wanted to give her instead, if that was all right. They met the following Saturday at a coffee shop on Durham Street. Loretta arrived first, ordered tea, and sat in the window, wondering whether this was an unusual thing to be doing. She decided it was not. It was just 2 women having coffee. Everything had to start somewhere. Vanessa arrived with the coat over her arm and her daughter, whose name was Chloe, beside her. Chloe was still wearing her backpack, apparently as a matter of principle. She sat across from Loretta and looked at her with the appraising seriousness of a child who has decided to form her own opinion. Vanessa laid the coat on the table between them. She said she was a social worker. She worked with families in low-income housing on the south end of the city. She had been doing it for 6 years, and she had been going through a period, she said it plainly, without dressing it up, where she had been struggling to believe that the work was making any difference, that the problems were too large and the resources too thin, and the system was not built to do what it was supposed to do, and she was one person with a caseload that was too big and a budget that was not enough. She said that evening in the grocery store had not solved any of those problems. The system was still the same system. The caseload was still the same caseload. But she said she had gone home that night and sat at her kitchen table after Chloe was asleep and thought about the pharmacist who had taken off her coat in a grocery store in November for no reason except that it needed to be done. And she had thought, if she can do that, I can do this one more day, and then the next day, and the one after. She said she just wanted Loretta to know that. She said sometimes the thing that keeps you going is not a big answer. It's someone in aisle 7. Loretta held her tea. She did not speak for a moment. Then she told Vanessa about the man in the Carhartt jacket, the one from the corner store when she was 11, the 2 quarters. She had never told that story to anyone except Isabel and Donna. She was not sure why she was telling it now, except that it seemed important, in this coffee shop, with this woman who had just explained exactly what 2 quarters can do when they land at the right moment. She said she never knew his name. She said she still thought about him. Vanessa said she would keep thinking about the soup lady. Chloe, who had been listening without appearing to listen, said the soup lady's name was Loretta. She said this to her mother with the particular authority of a child correcting an adult. Vanessa said she knew that. Chloe said then you should call her that. Loretta laughed again. Not the short kind this time. What happened next happened slowly, the way most things that matter happen, not with a moment of decision, but with a series of small steps that only look like a plan when you look back at them from the other end. Loretta mentioned, at that coffee shop table, that she had recently been dealing with some professional uncertainty. She did not elaborate. She said she had been thinking about what else she could do with 11 years of pharmacy experience that might reach further than a single counter. Vanessa mentioned that several of her clients were missing medical appointments because they could not afford their prescriptions and were managing conditions without medication, which made the appointments less useful and the conditions harder to manage. She said this was not unusual. She said there was a phrase for it: medication non-adherence, which was a clinical term for what happened when people could not afford to adhere. Which was not a clinical problem, it was an economic one. Loretta knew this. She had been watching it from the counter for 11 years. She said she knew. Vanessa said she had been trying to find a pharmacist willing to volunteer time at the community center on Kathleen Street 2 mornings a month, answering questions, reviewing medications, helping people understand what they were taking and what alternatives existed. She said she had asked 4 pharmacists in the past year. 2 had said they were too busy. 1 had said to contact their manager. 1 had given her a pamphlet. Loretta said she would do it. She said it before Vanessa finished explaining. Not because she was impulsive, because she recognized the shape of what was being described. The gap between where care was and where people were. The specific distance that was not geographical, not really. It was economic, logistical. The gap between a prescription that existed and a person who could not get to it. She had been standing at one end of that gap for 11 years. Vanessa was at the other end. The distance between them was not that large. The first session at the Kathleen Street Community Center was on a Wednesday morning in January, 6 weeks after the coffee shop meeting. Loretta set up at a folding table in the main room with a notepad, her laptop, and a printed copy of the Provincial Drug Benefit Formulary. She had arranged to access a portable consult setup through a colleague who ran a similar program in Timmins. She had not announced anything. Vanessa had posted a notice on the board by the front door and mentioned it to her clients. 11 people came that first morning. Not 11 people who had made appointments. 11 people who had walked past the board and seen the notice and thought, "Not today," and then walked in anyway because it was cold outside, and something about the notice said, this might be different from the other things posted on that board. A man in his 60s with type 2 diabetes who had not had his A1C checked in 14 months because the cost of the follow-up testing strips was pushing him towards skipping doses to make the prescription last longer. A young woman, 23, on 3 medications for anxiety and a thyroid condition, who did not know that 2 of them were available in generic form at less than half the cost. An older woman named Vera who came in and sat down and said she did not actually have a medication question. She had a blood pressure question. She just wanted to know what the numbers meant because the doctor had told her, and she had nodded but had not understood and had been too embarrassed to say so. Loretta spent 40 minutes with Vera explaining blood pressure in the particular way she had learned to explain things over 11 years, which was not by simplifying, but by finding the image that made the thing make sense. She told her about pipes and pressure and what the 2 numbers meant and when to worry and when not to. Vera left with a piece of paper that had the information written down in Loretta's handwriting. Not a pamphlet, not a printout, her handwriting, because Vera had said she liked handwriting. Loretta drove home that January morning, having missed her usual stop at Tim Hortons, because she had been in conversation until 15 minutes past when she meant to leave, and she sat in her car outside her house for a few minutes before going inside. She thought about the 11 people. She thought about Vera's blood pressure numbers, the ones nobody had explained. She thought about the young woman on 2 generics she had not known were generics, who had looked at the cost difference and said, quietly, that was $40 a month she had not known she was not saving. $40 a month. Not a life-changing sum. Not nothing. She thought about the counter she had stood behind for 11 years and the counter she had stood in front of today, and whether they were different kinds of the same counter or whether they were something else entirely. She thought they might be some. The Rexall transition concluded in February. Her last shift was on a Friday, the same day of the week as her first one, 11 years earlier, though she had not planned it that way. She returned her key fob and her staff discount card, and she said goodbye to the people she had worked beside, and she drove home and made dinner and called Isabel. She told Isabel then. She told her about the buyout and the timeline and the savings buffer and the mortgage math. She told her about Vanessa and the grocery store and the coat, which she had not yet told her. She told her about the Wednesday sessions and the 11 people and Vera's blood pressure and the $40 a month. Isabel listened to all of it without interrupting, the way she listened when she was taking something seriously, and then she said, "Mom, how long have you been carrying this?" Loretta said, "Since October." Isabel said she should have called. Loretta said she was calling now. Isabel was quiet for a moment. Then she said the community center thing sounded like the most like her that Loretta had been in a long time. Loretta said she did not know what that meant. Isabel said, "Yes, you do." By April, the Wednesday sessions had grown to 18 regulars. Not all of them regulars in the formal sense, but people who came back, which was the informal sense that mattered more. Vanessa had connected the program to her own caseload network, and word had moved the way. Word moves in places where formal systems have left gaps, which is quickly and specifically through churches and community kitchens, and the building management office of the affordable housing complex on Notre Dame Avenue. A pharmacist in Timmins, the one whose portable setup Loretta had borrowed, emailed her in March to ask how the program was structured. She wrote back and explained it, which took longer than she expected, because it was not very structured yet. It was mostly a folding table and a notepad, and 2 Wednesday mornings a month, and the explanation of that made her realize she needed to make it more structured so she could explain it to the next person who asked. She wrote it down. She wrote down how the sessions worked, what equipment was needed, what the common questions were, what the referral pathways were for the questions she could not answer at the table. She wrote it in plain language, not grant language, not clinical language, just the language of someone explaining to a colleague how they had started doing something. The document was 4 pages. She sent it to the pharmacist in Timmins. She sent it to 2 others she knew in Sault Ste. Marie. She did not send it thinking it would turn into something. She sent it because someone had asked. She got 3 emails back within a week. Loretta was not a person who sought attention. She did not have a social media presence in any professional sense. She was not the kind of person who built things and then stood in front of them and announced they had built them. She was the kind of person who noticed a gap and started filling it from the edge she was standing at. She had been standing at an edge her whole life. The edge was different now. The gap was the same gap. She called Donna in May, a Sunday afternoon, the long kind of call she usually saved for Isabel. Donna was 73, and still in the East End house, still efficient, still managing the leaky tap under the bathroom sink by herself, still drinking 1 cup of coffee in the morning and switching to tea after noon as she had done since Loretta was 8 years old. Loretta told her mother about the community center, about the folding table and the notepad, about Vera and the blood pressure numbers, about the document she'd written and the 3 pharmacists in other cities who had asked for it. Donna listened. She did not interrupt. When Loretta finished, she asked whether she was making enough to keep the mortgage. Loretta said not quite yet, but soon, because the health center had offered her a part-time consulting role, and she had 1 pharmacy willing to take her on 4 days a week, and the math was going to work. Donna said good. Then she said, "You always knew what the right thing was. I watched you know it since you were small. You just had to decide you were going to do it, and then you did." Loretta did not say anything for a moment. The line held between Sudbury and the East End of Sudbury, which was not a long distance on a map, but was a whole life across. Then she said she kept thinking about the man in the Carhartt jacket, the 2 quarters. She said she still thought about him, and she still did not know his name. Donna was quiet. Then she said, "He knew what the right thing was too." There is a folding table in the main room of the Kathleen Street Community Center every 2nd Wednesday. It is not a clinic. It is not a pharmacy. It has no sign above it and no name on the door. There is a pharmacist at the table with a notepad and a laptop and a printed formulary and 11 years of knowing what the gap looks like from the counter. There is a coat on the chair beside the table. Navy wool blend. It belongs to no one specifically. It is just there in case someone comes in cold. 47 people came through the center in the program's first full year. Not 47 appointments, 47 people. The difference matters. People who came, not cases that were processed. Some came once. Some came every second Wednesday and became the kind of regulars you nod at before they sit down. The missed prescription rate among Vanessa's clients, who attended at least 2 sessions, dropped by a number that was not dramatic enough for a press release and was significant enough for everyone in the room to notice. Loretta did not give speeches about what she was doing. She did not go to city council. She did not write an op-ed for the Sudbury Star. She filled a gap from the edge she was standing at and wrote down how she did it so other people could do the same thing from their edge. In November, exactly 1 year after the Thursday evening in the Sobeys on La Salle Boulevard, Loretta stopped at the same store after a Wednesday session. She was in the same aisle. She was not looking for anything in particular. She was just in the store and the aisle was where she was. A man, maybe late 40s, work clothes, was at the other end of the aisle. He was doing the math. She could see it. She had been watching it from behind a counter for 11 years. She knew the posture. She knew the particular stillness of it. She walked to where he was. She did not make it an event. She did not ask for the backstory or the circumstances. She already knew what the right thing was. She just had to do it. Which is the only part, when you strip everything else away, that was ever up to her. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. There is always a gap somewhere. There is always an edge to stand at. There is always a coat,